My name is Father Thomas Joseph. I'm the rector of the university. I'd like to bid a warm welcome to all our guest professors, our postdoc students, all those associated with the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, and with the work of the Faculty of Social Sciences here at the Angelicum. I'm only with you here for some opening comments. The first of which is to say that I am so deeply grateful to the Dean of the Faculty, Sister Helen Alford, for her tireless work on behalf of the important cause of the deep understanding and application of the Church's Catholic social thought, and her devotion and acumen in leading the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences in collaboration with the Angelicum, which is something that's a great honor for our university. I also want to thank Father Albino Barrera, who's present here, for all his work this year with the postdoc students or with the postdoc young professors who are also present. And I am deeply grateful to you personally for your alliance intellectually and ethically, you might say, in collaborating with the Holy See and with the university in this project. We're here today to celebrate and to engage with the Church's contribution to integral human development. The dynamic of human development is something, sadly, ever more challenging as the human race develops, expresses itself in a variety of social problems as well as social solutions. I want to just tell you, as a way of gently saying a word of encouragement and also solidarity, two stories just of what I experienced in the past few days. It's anecdotes, but they're interesting anecdotes. The first is that I was this last week teaching a seminar in Oxford University, and I'm, by some fortune, a member of a prestigious college in Oxford, which is Christ Church, which was the college in which John Locke taught, so his picture's on the wall, and there are images of his legacy, which of course is an important legacy in human government and reflection on human rights. I was down in the common room of the faculty before dinner, and I was talking to the Regius Professor of Divinity, who's a very elevated Anglican professor, and he was talking to me about the Pope's recent encyclical with incredible enthusiasm and intelligence, and just saying, this is probably the most widely diffused message of the Catholic social thought of the Church that has ever taken place in our lifetimes, because of the power now of the internet and the international press. The teaching has been very widely studied or received, and he said, in the second part of the encyclical, you see this very succinct but eloquent representation of so many of the principles. He said, this is so important for the common life of Christians today that we have this major restatement of Catholic social thought at the center of, you might say, human culture at a time when there are so many confusions. And it was very clear the Spirit was just deeply ecumenical. And of course, we're in the heart of one of the most elite universities. So that was interesting. We go up to high table. Sitting across from us is a wonderful young professor of jurisprudence, a very intelligent young person, teaching with huge influence. And I asked this person whether they believed in what they believe about human rights. Not in a totally provocative way, in a gentle way. But the response I got, Jeremy Bentham has said that is nonsense on stilts, and it's difficult to see how it is not. So I then raised the question, when we're dealing with a question like the extermination of the Jewish people in the Second World War, is there any intrinsic dignity or ontological quality of the Jew that would mean that you don't have the right to exterminate them, or that there's a protection about their life or their personhood that is not subject to convention or to the whims of positive civic law? And the professor said, well, I want there to be, but I don't know how to talk about it or what it might be. And that led to a very interesting conversation. This is not a rare position among contemporary jurisprudence personae. But I think it does speak to the human desire to find a ground for human rights and the human academic culture that impedes or that questions that possibility, making what we're doing here very important. Now, the person did say at the end, I happen to be very interested in what Thomas Aquinas teaches about the just price, because what Leo XIII taught in Rerum Novarum about the fact that there needs to be a just exchange of goods and services to support human families is something that's absolutely crucial to contemporary market economies. So it's interesting how, you saw on the one side, in this most elite, sort of in a way, not Catholic, kind of secular world of John Locke, liberalism and its legacy, both enlightenment and confusion and a kind of important dialogue, both people deeply engaged with the church in ways that were very important and opportune. The second anecdote I want to tell you is actually from my office this morning, and because I had an important conversation with a Mother Superior of the Dominican Sisters Congregation from Vietnam. It was heartbreaking and also really moving to hear about the work of the sisters in a country where there's 7% Catholic presence and a largely more secular regime, for sure, anti-Catholic in many ways. And she said, Father, the regime of Vietnam speaks about religious freedom, but they do not mean it in a way that would correspond to its real exigencies. And then she gave me lots of examples of where the sisters labor under incredible forms of persecution or restriction of their religious freedom. But she said, she said this to me this morning. She said, Father, what will save us in Vietnam when we engage with the secular communist government is the church's Catholic social thought. She said, the church's Catholic social thought is the key to our mission. She said, because the Communist Party has pledged things they do not deliver on. And then she said, in northern Vietnam, there's a whole area where it's rural, there's a racial minority, there are huge educational inequalities, there are huge numbers of people not being educated by the government, and they don't have enough food to eat. And she said the sisters go there often having to live for years like in hiding and lay clothing, and sometimes having to forego being regularly at church because it's a region where it's not always permissible to have Mass. And they teach the native Vietnamese of that region who are not Catholic to try to get them to the point of fundamental literacy. But she said this children also don't have enough food at home. They're too poor, so we feed them so that we can teach them. It's an awesome Thomistic thing to say. We feed them so that we can teach them, and we teach them so that they can have, she said, an authentic human development have their dignity recognized in authentic human development. And she said this is something we can do to show the secular world in Vietnam the integrity of the church's teaching and the witness to the gospel. So profound. So I thought between Christ Church and the sister going into the villages in northern Vietnam where there's just in dire poverty and really hunger and trying to teach, you see kind of a little bit the extremes of our world where the Catholic social thought is a deep academic and practical missionary endeavor to bring the truth of the gospel and the truth of the natural law and of human reason about human dignity into all domains of life, to elevate and ennoble social institutions, be they universities or be they governments and cultures, and to both engage with and provoke and reconcile with agents who might believe themselves hostile to the church, but who actually have so much to learn from, maybe also to contribute and to engage with in the church's Catholic social thought. I just think it's serious, so important to be doing this today. And I want to encourage you and also especially thank you for it. I hope you have a wonderful day of reflection. And please continue to work with us, especially postdoctoral professors. Please continue to work with us in a network in the years to come. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much, Father Thomas Joseph. So I would like to just carry on from what the rector was saying and talk a little bit more specifically about this postdoc program and what we've been trying to achieve. First of all, to say two words about the two institutions that are behind the program, the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences and the Faculty of Social Sciences. Maybe I should start with the second one, because the second one's a little bit older. The second one is founded in, well, the courses started in 52 to 53, but the faculty was founded in 1974, so it's just over 50 years old now. And in our statutes, it says that we're here to cultivate the research and study of social reality, in which the human person can realize their own existence in justice and peace, and in view of integral human development. And it carries on. In particular, the Faculty of Social Sciences wants to favor an advanced knowledge of statistics, methodology, sociology, psychology, history, law, economics, and politics, with a confronting dialogue with the values of Christian social thought. So that's what we're trying to do in this faculty here. Meanwhile, in the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, which is more prestigious but actually younger, founded 20 years after the Faculty of Social Sciences here in 1994 by Pope John Paul II, in those statutes, we are told that the Academy is, first of all, to promote the study and progress of the social sciences. Very interesting. The Church isn't afraid of knowledge and truth. The first goal is to promote the social sciences. After that, the Academy offers the Church elements to use in the development of her social doctrine, and then reflects on the application of that doctrine in contemporary society. So this postdoc program is operating between these two institutions, and you can see obviously there's a convergence of their goals and objectives. We are going to listen this afternoon to the 5 postdocs who are in the inaugural group. So it's a pretty important day for us. This is the first group in this new postdoc program dedicated to Pope John Paul II, who, as we just said, founded the Academy of Social Sciences and also defended his doctorate degree in the very room that we are in now in 1948. So this is our inaugural group, and we, from the beginning, decided we were going to have 2 topics that our postdocs in this program were going to follow. And this group has been following the first line, which is, as we said here in the call for applications, which we sent out over a year ago now, to harness the power of data literacy in the Church's social mission, and to conduct a major study that empirically examines how the Church's promotion of integral human development strengthens society. So it's mostly using quantitative analysis to assess the impact on society of the Church's work in various areas: education, health, social services, pastoral outreach, also looking at economic questions. The students first presented their results in a major seminar which took place at the Academy of Social Sciences in February, with some leading figures developing new metrics for well-being, including the co-chair of the UN high-level expert group on Beyond GDP that presented its report not very long ago. They've also been participating in other international events at the Academy. And so today they are here with us in the Angelicum, the other side of the bridge of this 2 institutions promoting this project, to present their final results. And then after this, they will be working with the directors of the project to produce their publications. So before handing over to Father Albino, who will gradually introduce the project more closely and the individual postdocs, I would just like to echo the rector's thanks to Father Albino and to Professor Stefano Menginello, who is the director of the Department of Economic and Environmental Statistics at ESTAT, and is also teaching courses and seminars with us on Catholic social teaching and data literacy. These 2 have really taken this project in hand and carried it forward, and you will see the results of their great work with the postdocs today. Thank you very much. I hand over to Albino.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming. And we will have two presentations. There will be a 45-minute presentation by Tony, and then we'll have another presentation, and then we'll have an open discussion, and then we'll break for a coffee break. We're running about 10 minutes late, so I'll eat into the coffee break. We have a 30-minute coffee break, so I'll eat 10 minutes out of that. Tony Persico is a senior economist of the Italian Ministry of Finance, and he's a board advisor to the European Investment Bank. He is a former advisor to the executive director of the International Monetary Fund and member of the G20 Development Working Group. His research focuses on the intersection of ethics, development, and economics. Tony holds an MS in analytics from the Georgia Institute of Technology in the US and a PhD in economics and statistics from the University of Chieti, Pescara in Italy. Tony, you have the floor.
So, first of all, I am the first fellow to present, so let me first of all thank you, the Pontifical Academy of Social Science and the Faculty of Social Science here at the Angelicum for having us. And I wanted to start saying that this fellowship was more than a research opportunity. It was really a privilege, both from an academic point of view, having the ability to engage with the members of the Academy and the members of the faculty, and also from a human point of view, because we had a very enriching and enabling environment. It was a wonderful experience, also as a human person involved in this common research. So, as Father Albino was saying, I have a very quantitative background. So, to me, the fellowship was also an opportunity to get out a little bit of my comfort zone and to look more on social realities and social studies. So what I did with Father Albino was to study how the Catholic Church presence impacted immaterial capital stocks at the country level worldwide. And our starting point was this claim about Pope Leo and Pope Francis that the gravest poverty is not to know God, meaning that we need to address also spiritual care as a dimension of what constitutes people's well-being and what constitutes people's poverty. And, we have a lot of studies on, let's say, religious institutional dimensions, but they are also looking at religious dimensions as a homogeneous factor. So they were focusing either on individual religiosity or on aggregate measures. And we were always left with an underexplored dimension, that is the structure, the institutional framing of the church. So what we were doing is a shift from the religion as a belief to religion as an institution to see how the church directly impacts this kind of poverty, this kind of spiritual need of the people around the world. So we were trying to measure the invisible, which is less complex than it seems, and for this reason we use a multidimensional definition of this immaterial stock. We differentiated the spiritual capital, the moral capital, and the relational capital, looking at religion belief, normative belief, civic participation, pro-social attitude. And when I say multidimensional, it's not just talking about multidisciplinarity, it means it in the less figurative and more concrete way. We are literally building up a lot of mathematical dimensions. And it will be a little bit complex, but we are not afraid of complexity. In analytics, we eat complexity for breakfast, so we are not afraid of a little bit of, mathematical complexity here. So, first of all, we have a literature that was looking at religious belief, and basically we have these three core work stream in the literature that were looking at religious belief, moral norms, and pro-social attitudes. But I would say that no one of these work stream was looking at all the dimensions simultaneously, taking into account the institutional framework of the church. That is what we are trying to do here. So we have a lot of, say, well-tested theory on specific dimensions. We are trying to put all of these dimensions in a comparison with the Catholic Church presence in the world and to see what theory hold, what theory does not hold. And what we add here is basically the implementation of this institutional framework into different variables. Those different variables are basically divided in two great categories. The scale of the Catholic presence in the world, measured as a clergy workforce, religious workforce, the Catholic presence, the number of Catholic centers or parishes around the world, and their intensity. Meaning not just the ratio over the population, but the ratio over the Catholic population of the country, which is, we will see a totally different dimension. And doing so, we were spanning different levels. So we were looking at the micro level, the meso level of the parishes, the macro level of the Catholic presence in the country. So we were able to see different layers of Catholic presence. And also we were able to demonstrate a non-uniform effects across the different form of capital that we defined at the very beginning. So the first step was data collection. We used the world value survey as a starting point to define what was the capital stock of the spiritual capital, the moral capital, the relational capital, and then we combined the data with the Statistical Yearbook of the Church that were, to which we were granted a premier digital access. So it was a very precious opportunity for us as well as a researcher to be able to work with this data set for the very first time, combining the data set with the world value survey, other World Bank indicators, and also we use historical instruments, instrumental variable to test for endogeneity. And we will see how we use this kind of data. We used a cross-sectional approach because the world value survey is a little bit sparse, so we were joining the data points we had based on the country and the year, but we were not able to conduct a panel data analysis in this case. And also the historical instruments were taken at different steps to see how things change when we were getting closer to the nature of the phenomena that we were analyzing. So I was saying we were collecting data from the world value survey. It is a huge data set of surveys conducted around the world on specific values. And what we were doing is to have a panel of candidate variables that we can use to define spiritual capital, moral capital, and relational capital. And so what we did, we collected the data from the world value survey, we collected them and standardized them, and we're looking at the data set to see where the data were present and if the data had enough variability and they were able to work in a principal component analysis based indexes. So if the data were carrying enough information. As you can see, we have a lot of empty spaces. And when the data also are too similar, like in the relational capital, they do not carry enough information. So we end up selecting the variables. And so we started with 17 initial variables, but only retained 7 from the spiritual dimension. We end up with 4 retained variables for the moral capital. And again, we end up with 7 retained variables for the relational capital. And here, basically, what we did was to collapse all those data in the blue ring in one unique variable that were able to extract some useful information for us. So what we did is look at the variable in the world value survey. We standardized them. We dropped all the sparse, the data that had more than 50% missing values. Then we removed all the variables that have not enough variance. At this point, we inputted using the principal component analysis the missing data. We use this methodology that's called MIS-MDA. Then we created the principal component analysis, and we end up building this PCA-based index, and those are the orientation, the dimension that we used in the PCA. And if you wonder what was in the... So those were the questions we actually used for the principal component analysis. For spiritual, they were basically asking people if you do believe in God, hell, heaven, those kind of questions. Then they have a scale, and we had to recode the scale in order to standardize all of them, and then we had to reverse the sign of some scale, because some of the scales were growing with less significance of spirituality in people's life, for example. So we had to do all this kind of adjustment just before ending up building the principal component analysis. And those are the results that we obtained. So basically how it works. The principal component analysis put together several dimensions that are correlated and try to see which one captured the greatest variance. Like in this case, we have one question on the side on the importance of religion, the other one on you believe in God. We see this correlation, but if we flip a little bit the dimension, we are able to create a new dimension, which is the principal component analysis. And what we take as the value for this specific two question is not what we were projecting here or here, but what we project on this new axis. This is on 2 dimensions. Imagine this building up on 3, 4, 5, 6 to 7, 8 dimensions. This is the way we mathematically construct the principal component analysis based index. And we were using just the principal component analysis number 1, which is the one that captures the greatest variance. So why we use this? Because we use this to reduce the dimensionality of the dataset without losing any useful information. We use this because it's able to capture the greatest amount of variance in the data. And we saw before in the dataset that the variance are like gold when you have a very sparse dataset. And also because it is, let's say, quite neutral. So you don't have to arbitrarily set any weight like you will do in a composite index. So it also granted us an objective take on the data. Everyone can replicate the same result with the same data without any arbitrary indication. And also it is useful because it allows us to see which variable contribute the most. And here we can see for spiritual, index is the importance of God, for moral is the justificability items, and for relational are the variance, the variable related to the tolerance that are the leading one, leading the principal component analysis. So we ended up with this PCA-based index, and we had the data from the church. We had to find a tool to create a relation between the Catholic Church dataset and the PCA-based index on the immaterial capital. What we did is to use the regressions. So the regression at the very beginning were just tested on the PCA capital index and the GNI. This was done as a control, as a baseline. However, we end up seeing that the data had a lot of heteroscedasticity, which is in statistical terms as bad as it looks. So we need to correct heteroscedasticity, and we had to apply this log transformation on the scale and on the intensity measure we were using, and this is a very easy mathematical trick. Then the other issue we had from a statistical point of view was endogeneity. Endogeneity is not as bad as it seems, it's worse. So to correct and to check for endogeneity, we don't use just the log transformation, we need a true system equation, that is the one we had here, to assess the instrumental variable performance. So this is the kind of regressions we conducted. The first one is the baseline, to see how the PCA index the immaterial capital we have compared with GNI. Then we compare them with scale variable. How many priests per people, how many Catholics per people, and then we compare them with intensity variables. How many priests per Catholics, always controlling for GNI. And then we ended up having a more specific focus on the region, because we had a data that was not significant and was worth to have a second look on a regional basis. And then we have this instrumental variable check for endogeneity. So one of the key elements of the paper, of the research, is this differentiation between scale and intensity. On one side of this plot, you have the number of clergy per million people. On the other one, you have the number of Catholics per million people. Of course, the two data moves together. More Catholics, more priests, and it is this scale axis, the blue one. But then you can see that there is a good degree of variability. This one is the change in intensity. And what we did basically is this set of equations you see here. We see that there is a good positive relationship between the amount of Catholics and the amount of war folks, but there is this huge substantial residual variation we want to address. So the two things are different, and they have a measurement implication. Because if we take out one of the two pieces, we end up having what in statistics is called a specification error. So basically, we are looking at a two-dimensional phenomena, but we only look it from one side, and we miss something. How the two things are related is basically, if you look at the first equation, we were using this log transformation, but basically we have the number of priests over n, which is the population, but we also want to check how the indexes, the moral capital, the spiritual capital, and etc., were moving when compared to the ratio of priests over Catholics. But priests over Catholics can be defined as priests over population over Catholics over population. And since it is a log, a ratio in a log is a difference. So basically we can decompose it as a difference between the ratio of priests over population minus the ratio of Catholic over population. And we can look at this difference to see what is dominating the equation, the movement. And of course, you cannot do this sort of dimensionality analysis if you take only one dimension, because you are missing the specification on the other side. So, the first run, this is just the baseline scenario. We saw how the spiritual, the moral, and the relational capital moved according with the GNI per capita in the countries. We use the log transformation because also GNI per capita presents some heteroscedasticity, and it is very usual in econometrics to use the log for GNI, so nothing extraordinary here. But what we can see is that the spiritual capital tends to decrease with a higher GDP, with higher GNI. The moral capital tends to grow as the GNI increase, and the same happened for the relational capital. All of these three relations are significant and explain a good degree of variability, except for the moral capital that has a somehow lower R squared, which say how much we are explaining or what we see in this plot. Then we use different scale variables. So we were looking at scale relationship now, and now we are using the number of pastoral centers, the amount of Catholic population over the total population, and the clergy workforce. So we have these three measures of size, and what we see is that all of them behave in the same way. So basically we have a negative relation between scale and the moral and the spiritual capital. But we have a positive relation between the Catholic presence and the relational capital. All of those are significant, which means it's a strong signal. It is an evidence on something going on here. What is clear here is that we have these distinct trends. They are negative for the spiritual and the moral, a positive for the relational. Remember, those trends are net of the impact of the effect of the income that we saw below. So basically, moral is flipping here. So this is net of what the income was already doing to this immaterial capital. We end up with the moral capital flipping the delta. And maybe this can explain why the slope is not so deep in the case of moral capital. Again, we use this same regression, but using this time intensity, the amount of, let's say, the ratio of clergy over 1,000 of Catholics. And now we have the clergy workforce on the side, which is one of the three measurable scales, and the intensity scale, the intensity variable now. And you can see that the intensity variable is flipping the sign every time. So we have a totally different dynamic here going on. For spiritual capital, we have a positive relation, for moral the same, and for the relational, now we have a negative correlation, which is interesting because all of those things are significant except for the spiritual one. So the first column, the 2.28 gold here, is not significant. And this was a little bit puzzling for us because we saw that spiritual and moral capital were moving all the same in the case of scale. What's going on in the case of intensity? Maybe there is something different in the way the questions in the survey were formulated when regarding spiritual variables and when regarding moral variables. So our hypothesis was that the way they were asking things about spirituality was a little bit Western oriented. And while moral things can be understood in the same way all around the world, spiritual things in Asia tends to be a little bit different. So we tried to decompose all of these variables, taking apart Asian countries and the rest of the world. And what we saw is that for moral and relational capital, the relation had the same sign. They were stable. But when we're taking out Asia, also spiritual capital became positive with a sign reverse, which is exactly what we were expecting here. So this one is indeed a positive effect, the same one we saw in moral capital. Yeah, this is the relation when you take out all those yellow Asian countries. And it is significant, which means it's really something that is in the data here. And the fact that only spiritual capital flips when taking out Asian countries confirms us that there is something different. So it could be sociological, maybe there is something related with having a minority status in certain contexts, but could also be that the question on religion are a little bit different in the way they are received in different contexts. And here comes the issue of endogeneity. So basically, we were asking ourselves, is it possible that the Catholic presence and those immaterial capital forms are all driven by some external forces that we are not accounting for in this model? So we are looking at something that is totally extraneous here. It's something that is totally out of our perimeter. So we checked this issue, which is called endogeneity, using instrumental variables. So instrumental variables are things that can be related to the Catholic presence and the Catholic intensity, but cannot related to the value of those immaterial capital that they have today. So they cannot influence directly the material capital, but they can influence only the Catholic Church. And we use this different set. A minimal set of instrumental variables is to see if there was in the country a state religion, if there were an Iberian colony, and what was the percentage of Catholics at the beginning of the century. then we ended up using a little bit larger set, including some historical variable, which is if there was state regulation of the religions, what is the first year of evangelization, if there was an historical presence of religious order in the country. Then we added a different check. If the state religion that was at the very beginning of the century, it is 1900, was still present in 1917, was still present in 2000, what was the Catholic presence in 2000, and what is the degree of religious pluralism at the end of the millennium. What we did is to use this historical variable and this instrumental variable, and we checked their performance. So the performance of an historical of an instrumental variable is done using different tests. So the first test, let's say, is trying to tell us if the historical variable, the instrumental variable, are good at predicting today Catholic scalar intensity. And this is done with the F-test. And what we see in the first column is a very good performance. Then we check if all the instrumental variables behave consistently among them, if there is something wrong, something going on a different direction. And we do this with the Sargan test. And again, we see that there is a broad consistency. The only point where the consistency is a little bit tricky is when we use the full dataset, which is the one which is closer to the kind of things we are studying now, because our time span is 2016, 2023. So this kind of concerning heat map here is related because these numbers are very close to what we are looking now. And in the end, we were asking ourselves, but do the instrumental variable move at all the scalar intensity variable? And this is done through the identification signaling test, which is the Anderson-Rubin test for the technicality. And again, we saw that there is some issue here and here, but this issue tend to decrease when we use the full dataset. So there is some sort of trade-off between the tests. But what is more important is answering the question, do we really need this instrumental variable? Because we have to see if there is some endogeneity literally going on here. And the Wu-Hausmann test mostly find that there is no endogeneity, meaning that there is no correlation with error terms in technical terms, meaning that the prediction that we obtain using the variables as predicted by the historical instrument are mostly consistent with what we obtain using the variable itself. So, as you can see, what is the comforting sign is that all the values that we obtain using single variable, the variable with the GNI control, or the different instrumental setting that we were using, we were assessing before, are all consistent. So basically, the kind of flipping signs, the tendency to grow, to increase or decrease, are all consistent. And if you want to have a look at what we put here, this is the way we collected the data, the range, and the key sources. The only correction we did was for the first year of evangelization for the Gulf states. Basically, we didn't use the historical year because the historical year, for example, for Saudi Arabia would be like, I don't know, 200 before Christ, but then we know that Catholicism dissolved at all in the region. So we use the most recent data when Western people gained access to the country during the first establishment of the oil fields. So this kind of year that are around 70, 75, those were manually inputted and not based on what would have been in the historical data, okay? And this is all the things we have. The GNI per capita, the different scale measure, the alternative workforce, we tested different aggregates. Clergy plus religious personnel, clergy plus religious plus lay personnel. And we find out also that the stronger signal was always for the clergy per million people. This is the reason why we use clergy to define intensity, and we use this workforce aggregate and not the other to calculate the ratio over the Catholics. And what we have is this flipping sign that we call the scale versus intensity paradox. We have this signaling of the workforce saying that the greatest impact, the greatest signal came from the clergy presence and in the region, in the country. And also we have this clear flipping, and we have this context-specific issue here with the spiritual capital. So we can say for spiritual capital that the scale confirm the negative secularization, the negative association, and so the secularization thesis. We can see that the intensity show up this context-dependent issue, and it is what we call the Asian exception. For moral capital, we saw that there is this negative relation, can be explained as a substitution, like in Ingard, in Alcina, but alternative reading can be also done saying that the large-scale Catholic presence may produce just a nominal affiliation or a licensing phenomena where people sort of delegate and get more relaxed on the moral side. And also we saw the positive intensity relation, which can be explained with the club theory, saying that when there is a very close tight club, people tend to obey more to the rule of the club. And also we have this scale versus intensity paradox. On the relational side, we can see this positive correlation, meaning that this is consistent with the bridging theory pointed out by Putnam, for example, saying that the network on the field of the Catholics, of the parishes, of the priests, generate a bridging social capital. But on the same time, we have a negative effect on the intensity, which can be related with, can be explained as a bonding effect. Basically, it's when pastoral relationships become too intensive that they shift from being bridging to being bonding, of becoming some extractive relationships, the one that Acemoglu and Robinson studied. And also we can conclude saying that all those things were robust enough to be tested and resist with instrumental variable analysis. So we have these key 6 theoretical mechanisms here working all at the same time. Our conclusion, well, the kind of analysis can be extended in a panel, on a panel of dynamic analysis. We can look more in deep on regional and minority heterogeneity. We can be more explicit on the multi-level, but of course we also had limit here, which is one of the first limits is the fact that we are using cross-sectional analysis. We cannot use the panel because the world value survey was too sparse. And also we could check different way, with different approach to PCA-based indexes and create different alternative indexes to see if they are sensitive to, let's say, different design and alternative specification. And also we could look at something more in deep than country level aggregation. Something like within country heterogeneity could be put in the indication. So the first conclusion, we can say that multidimensional framework for immaterial capital is working well here in terms of research findings. It shows that the social effects of religion are multidimensional rather than reducible to a single measure, and they have a quite, let's say, heterogeneity, especially when we look at the differences between scale and intensity. They hold when tested with instrumental variable for endogeneity, and of course we had this clear sign that the clergy is the workforce driver in terms of human resources on the field. Moving forward, for sure we have some implication for social religion, saying that we should always try to separate scale and intensity, looking at the degree of differentiated result we can obtain. There are implications for social capital theory because we can see that the religious institution can generate both bridging and bonding forms of social capital. And we need to check what is on the field. If we have only a scale presence, if we have a good degree of intensity, so these things can make a difference. And also it has also an implication on the church governance because it said ordinances is telling us that pastoral intensive ministry may be more effective than uniform expansion in a certain country or in a certain area. And again, I would say that the key overall message is that the data can work as a form of stewardship to the church mission. So we really should try to understand the role of the data analysis for pastoral program in a spirit of authentic stewardship to the church mission. This is some selected videography, and I look forward for your question. This is the set of the word value survey variables, the instrumental variable we use, a few things on how the PCA component analysis works and how the instrumental variables works, and those are, this is basically the sample of the country used for the analysis when applying all the pipeline we had to do for the PCA-based indexes. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I realize that, we're under severe time constraint. And so, listening to Tony is just like drinking out of a fire hydrant. And for those of you who would like to get to know more, we are aiming to have these works published. And we will alert everybody when they're published. His presentation is merely scratching the surface. It's a very quick thumbnail sketch. It's a very rich, sophisticated analysis, quantitative analysis of some very difficult data sets. But do not worry, we're working toward publication. And if you just send your email to Isabella on the invitation, we will make sure that you are informed once these works are published. Thank you, Tony. And there will be time for questions that you might have for open discussion. At this point, I have to make an announcement of a change in the program. Our keynote speaker could not make it because his flight was canceled. So it's, the hazards. This is Professor Enrico Giovannini, our keynote speaker, so he won't be able to make it today. But Professor Stefano will be able to fill us in on what Professor Giovannini would have talked about on Beyond GDP. At this point, I'd like to introduce the second presentation. This is by Daniel. And so Daniel completed his doctorate in political science at the European Union University Institute, where his research focused on the relationship between administrative traditions and welfare state development. His work examines comparative welfare systems, public administration, and state civil relations, with a particular interest in the role of religious institutions in social policy and economic development. He has held research positions at the European University Institute and the University of Florence, and has been a visiting researcher at Sciences Po Paris. Daniel, may I invite you to please take the floor.
Hello, everybody. I hope welcome to this event. I want to thank you once more, our amazing supervisors who have led us and encouraged us to work on this topic for the last months. I'm changing slightly because we all know that institutional quality, I'm going to talk about how the Catholic Church influences institutional quality and development, which is also related, institutional quality is related, and development in general is related to economic growth. But since our data talks more about, at the meso level, about this issue, I'm going to talk about how the Catholic Church affects institutional quality, human capital, overall influence and development. So here there's an image, because today I was listening to the Pope, because he was holding a speech in the Spanish Parliament, and it was amazing to see the Pope next to Pietro Parolin, whom I met a few months ago personally, speaking from the Spanish Parliament. And while the Pope was speaking, for a second, like, he was speaking about many issues in Catholic social doctrine and so on, but then he said something, and then everyone paid attention to what he said, because he said, "Could you please, all the MPs, look to the ceiling and look at the Christian inspiration, or at the Christian figures that you can see in the ceiling." And my favorite one, when I went to the Spanish Congress, was the one of Moses, and it's about. And then the Pope said, laws should be oriented towards the common good. So it doesn't matter if it's right wing, left wing, but all the MPs, all the political parties should try to foster good laws. And then this is what this presentation is about. Is the Catholic Church supporting or encouraging the common good empirically? So this is what we're going to see, is the presence of the Catholic Church related to human development. So what we know. So we know from the literature that institutions foster development. We know this from institutional economics. So from Asimov, Robinson, Roderick. So we also know that religion fosters schooling, skills, and human capital in general. What we don't know is what's the exact effect. Is religion fostering human capital is religion fostering development through civil society, or is it fostering development through providing skills and human capital? So there are two branches in the literature. And these studies are not about the Catholic Church, they're about Protestant churches, or some of them are, but there's a gap to know exactly how religion influences development. So basically, thanks to the data from Annuarium, we could know or hope for explain how the Catholic Church influences development. So there's a puzzle. So there's two ways, but they might be simultaneous, but we could say the church is good for development because of parishes act as hubs. People gather. This would be Tocqueville hypothesis, or Putnam. People gather in parishes, or they build community, and this fosters economic growth. The other one would be the church creates schools and creates educational infrastructure, which later influences development. So to answer this, we use Vatican data from the Annuarium Statisticum Ecclesiae. We use data on UNCTAD, which creates an index out of institutional quality, so the quality of government. And then here I underline some of their components. and it's based on the World Bank's Worldwide Governance Indicators. And I used the World Bank population and GDP per capita to control for possible co-founders, so for things that might explain development or that I need to control for in my statistic model. So to show a bit the data, so we can see, for example, like what are the countries with more Catholic university students. In 1995, for example, this is what we got. So there's like USA, Brazil, India, Peru, Belgium, Colombia, Spain, Mexico, Japan, Argentina. Here we can see that in 2010, a lot of countries have grown, and there are countries moving along so they're not the same countries. Well, the USA is still the country with the highest number of Catholic university students, but we also have countries like Mexico, which have exploded exponentially, or for example, Ecuador or Colombia. This is Catholic secondary students by country in 2010. So the country with the more Catholic secondary students is India, but we also have France, we also have Congo Democratic Republic, USA, the Philippines, Kenya. And this is Catholic parish density by country, just to show a bit like the data which I've used for my model. So basically, measuring Catholic organizations. So for the territorial presence, we use parishes per capita from 2016 to 2019. And for educational presence, we use the amount of Catholic students in secondary and university education in 1995, 2005, and 2010. Why? Because we use a lag. Because we use the past amount of Catholic students to predict an outcome. So we know that because it's a past variable, so instrument, it couldn't be able to influence the outcome on the same year. So this is why economists use lags, and we did that, and then we also, so this is like the design of the model. So we're asking, while using these variables, can we predict institutional quality or human capital in the world countries? And so Catholic secondary education and tertiary education predicts institutional quality. So the amount of Catholic students in 1995 predicts that countries have higher degrees of institutional quality. And here's an example. These ones are the effects of the model, but I didn't include the whole model in it. And we see that it's cumulative. So in 1995, the effect is stronger than in 2010. So having had in the past strong networks of Catholic education can predict whether a country has a higher level of institutional quality in the UNCTAD index by the United Nations. And this we tried with both secondary education, Catholic secondary education, and tertiary education. And the result too is like Catholic universities and secondaries predict human capital. So the countries that had a higher effect on, and then we also see that it's cumulative. So this means in the literature of human capital, they say human capital is cumulative. It means, so if you have been working on your human capital for longer, the effect of it will be larger because you will be collecting, like you will be building on this base of strong human capital that you have fostered through the years. So this is why we see that the effect of 1995 is stronger than the one in 2010, because the more you go back, the stronger the effect is. For the parish channel, we have less years because we only have from 2000, because the UNCTAD or the UNCTAD dataset only runs from 2016 to 2018. So we found some results on the panel OLS, but once we included country fixed effects, the effect did not survive. So parishes. The fact that the amount of parishes per capita does not change much from one year to another makes that the effect can only be seen in cross-country analysis. So it means for education, we know that when in a certain country education increases, then it increases its human capital or institutional quality. But because we have a longer series of data, in this one we're only using the parishes per capita from 2016 to 2019. But at the end, this is kind of a regression outcome. So how Catholic secondary students in 1995 predict institutional quality. What we know. So we know that Catholic education can predict both human capital and institutional quality, which is related to broader development outcomes. This paper contributes to mechanism clarity for a new measurement using the dynamic statistical ecclesia, and shows that education is the more consistent channel for human capital and institutional quality, or one of them. Let's be cautious with this. And I would say that Catholic schools matter, and the developmental contribution of Catholic organizations appears to vary mainly through educational infrastructure. However, without churches, there would be no schools. So it's not that you can distinguish the effect completely, because you need Catholic communities to build Catholic schools, obviously. But what we could see is that we could really test the effect of Catholic schooling on development, but we couldn't test the effect of Catholic parishes on development strictly. Thank you so much.
And I have the privilege of being able to introduce to you a joint presentation by Isabella and Jose. And there is a joint presentation because the methodology for health and education are very similar, as you will see within a few minutes. Isabella Cardiscal is an Italian sociologist and educator. Isabella holds a PhD in sociology and social research and teaches at the Pontifical Salesian University in Rome and Tuscany. Her research focuses on the sociology of education, youth studies and identity formation, relational approaches to social and educational processes, and quantitative and qualitative research methodology. Her current work examines the structural role of Catholic educational institutions within national education systems and their contribution to integral human development. Jose Israel Leon Pedrosa is a Mexican physician. He's a medically trained physician. He holds a PhD in immunology and a master's degree in health systems administration and a specialization diploma in statistics. As you can see, this is a whole package right here. In the case of Jose, he knows what he's researching on. His research focuses on the intersection of medicine, statistics, and social sciences, with particular interest in health systems. He has been recognized as a fellow of the American College of Physicians and the Royal College of Physicians. He holds a master's degree in pastoral theology. And with this, may I give you the floor.
Thank you, Father Albino. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for being here. And today, me and Jose, we present the final outcome of a research project developed within this JP2 postdoctoral fellowship. The title of our presentation is The Church's Contribution to Satisfying Educational and Health Needs. The project starts from a broad question: how can we observe in empirical terms the contribution of the Catholic Church to integral human development? And today we focus on two fundamental dimensions of human development: education and health. These are not secondary services, they are two concrete ways through which human development became visible. Children go to school, people receive care, institutions respond to vulnerability, societies build human and social capacity over time. For this reason, our question is not simply where is the church present, but how does the church's presence relate to the structural needs and capacity of different countries. In other words, we are not only asking whether Catholic schools or healthcare institutions exist, but we are asking whether their role changes according to the structure of national systems. This required a comparative and structural approach. We needed to connect church presence with the broader educational and healthcare ecosystem. And education and health are different fields. They have different institutions, different professional systems, and different forms of intervention. There are some pictures of Salesian mission. And in this project, we analyzed them, health and education, together because they share the same structural problem. Both are essential dimensions of integral human development, and both depend on the capacity of national systems to transform rights into concrete services. Access to school is not only a personal issue, access to healthcare is not only a personal issue, but both require institution, resource, public responsibility, and social protection. For this reason, we adopt a common analytical logic. We do not overlap education and health. We analyze both through the same structural question. How do needs, system capacity, and Catholic presence relate to one another? From this common framework, we can now move to the objectives of the research. And the general objective of the project is to identify and interpret structural configurations of countries. By structural configurations, we mean different combination of demand and supply. Demand refers to the intensity of needs. In education, this includes demographic pressure, child population, enrollment pressure, and in health, other variables that we look. Supply refers to the capacity of a national system to respond. So we are not simply comparing countries by level of development. We are asking how needs and capacity are combined. Some countries have high needs and weak capacity, others have lower needs and stronger capacity, others are in an intermediate position. So this allows us to ask the central question of the project: is church presence mainly concentrated where public systems are weakest? Does it become stronger where national systems are expanding? Or does it take more specialized forms in consolidated context? In this way, the project tries to understand whether Catholic educational and health services assume different roles in different structural contexts. We can translate the general question into 4 specific objectives. The first objective is to construct an empirical typology of countries. This is important because we did not start from predefined categories such as rich and poor, north and south, or continent. We allowed the data to identify the main structural configurations. The second objective is to describe the structural profile of each cluster. Once the clusters are identified, we need to understand what they represent. Are they fragile systems? Are they expanded systems? Are they consolidated or mixed and transitional systems? So the third objective is to analyze the distribution of Catholic presence across these clusters. This is the point where the analysis moves from countries' profiles to the role of the Church. The fourth objective is comparative and interpretative. We compare the clusters in order to understand whether ecclesial presence assumes different forms in different contexts. This is a key point. We are not looking for one single universal model of Catholic contribution. We are asking whether the role of the Church changes according to structural conditions. For this reason, the study is not only descriptive and these move now to methodology. The methodological innovation of the project lies in the integration of different statistical sources. On one side, we use international datasets. These include UNESCO, the World Bank, the Global Health Data, Global Burden of Disease. And these sources help us describe national systems. They provide indicators on education, public expenditure, demographic structure, mortality, health capacity, and service coverage. On the other side, we use, for the first time, the Vatican Statistical Yearbook. It provides data on church activities and institutions at the global level. Without this source, it would be impossible to analyze Catholic education and health care presence in a comparative way. The central methodological step is therefore the link between two types of data, secular international indicators and ecclesial statistical data. This is not only a technical step, it changes the type of question we can ask. We do not only ask how many Catholic schools or health institutions exist, we ask how they are positioned within countries that differs in needs, vulnerability, capacity. So, after defining the source, the next step is to explain how the dataset was constructed and checked. The unit of analysis is the country. This is the limit of the possibility of annuarium statistical, and the final sample include 170 countries. This gives the project a broad international coverage. The dataset uses the most recent available observation for each variables. This choice allows us to maximize comparability and to remain close to current structural situation of each country. A key issue in global comparative data is missing data. Is a key issue, and some countries do not report all indicators. Some international sources have incomplete coverage. To address this issue, we used Miche multiple imputation. In simple terms, Miche does not simply replace missing values with the average, it estimates plausible values by using the relationship among the variables. This is important because our next step is PCA. PCA depends on the correlation structure of the dataset. So we needed to preserve the relationship among variables as much as possible. But before running PCR, we checked the correlation matrix. We also checked the consistency between original and imputed data. The goal was to make sure that imputation did not distort the structure of the dataset. So this slide shows that the dataset was not only assembled, it was also tested for coherence before the statistical analysis. And now, Okay. The analytical strategy follows 3 steps. The first step is principal component analysis or PCA. PCA is used to reduce complexity. We start with many variables. These variables describe demand and supply in education and health. PCA helps us identify the main structural dimension that organize these variables. The second step is FATSI cluster analysis. After PCA, each country has a position along the main structural dimensions. So FATSI clustering groups countries with similar positions, but it does not force countries into rigid categories. This is important. Countries are complex. A country may be closer to one configuration and still share some feature with another. FATSI clustering respects this complexity. And the third step is descriptive and interpretative. Once the clusters are identified, we examine the church's presence in each cluster. This allows us to interpret the role of Catholic educational and care-related activities within different national contexts. So the logic is cumulative. Firstly, we identify structural dimension, then we identify structural configuration, finally we interpret the differentiated role of the church. After this common methodological framework, we now enter in the separate section, education and health. The main finding is that Catholic educational presence does not simply reflect a country's level of development. This is an important point. One might expect Catholic education to be strongest either in the most vulnerable countries where educational needs are greatest, or in the most developed countries where educational systems are already highly structured. Instead, the results show a more differentiated pattern. In many high-demand contexts, Catholic schools remain especially important at the primary and the secondary level. By contrast, Catholic tertiary education appears more strongly connected to consolidated contexts where national educational systems are more developed and where the church's role becomes more associated with higher education, specialization, and institutional strengthening. This suggests that Catholic education does not play the same role everywhere. In more vulnerable settings, its contribution is more directly connected to access, basic schooling, and educational inclusion, and in more consolidated systems, it becomes more connected to higher education, diversification, and institutional consolidation. So, to show this empirically, we first need to explain how the education variables were selected. The model includes 13 variables grouped into 3 conceptual dimensions: institutional capacity, educational participation and outcomes, and demographic and social demand. The first dimension concerns educational resources and institutional capacity. Here we include education expenditure as a percentage of GDP, teacher density at primary and secondary level, and pupil-teacher ratios. These variables help us understand how strong the educational system is structurally, how many resources are available, how many teachers are present, and how much pressure classrooms are under. The second dimension concerns participation and outcomes. Here we include the primary enrollment, secondary enrollment, and primary completion. These variables help us understand whether children enter school, remain in school, and successfully progress throughout the system. The third dimension concerns demographic and social demand. These include the share of children in the population, population growth, infant mortality. These variables are essential because educational systems do not operate under the same demographic condition everywhere. A country with a very large and rapidly growing child population faces much stronger educational pressure than a country with the demographic stability or population aging. So, a final methodological note is important. The analysis does not include non-Catholic, non-profit educational providers because globally comparable data are not available. And this is also one reason why Vatican data are so valuable. They allow us to analyze at least one major non-state educational actor comparatively and globally. The first analysis is principal component analysis. And this slide presents the first major statistical synthesis of the dataset. The graph on the right is called a script plot. The script plot shows how much variance is explained by each principal component. The first component explains the largest share of variance. The second explains less, and the following components progressively explain smaller portions. The importance point here is the clear elbow after the second component. This tells us that the first two components capture the main structural organization of the data, while the following components add more fragmented and less central information. Together, PC1 and PC1-2 explain 60.7% of the total variance for a global comparative dataset composed of 13 social indicators. This is a strong and meaningful synthesis. PC1 alone explains 47.9% of the variance. That means that one dominant structural axis organizes much of the educational variation across countries. PC1 captured the contrast between demographic pressure and structural vulnerability and educational consolidation. PC1-2 explains 12.9% of the variance, and it captures schooling intensity and system utilization. That is how strongly educational systems are mobilized and expanded. The key point is that PCR does not simply separate demand from supply, but it reveals a broader structural gradient in which vulnerability, demographic pressure, enrollment, completion, and institutional capacity are deployed interconnected. The slide explains the meaning of the two principal components, and to interpret the components, we look at the loadings. Loadings tell us which variables contribute most strongly to each component, and they help us understand what the statistical axis means substantively. For PC1, the positive side is associated with high pupil-teacher ratio, high child share, high infant mortality, and many primary students per 1,000 inhabitants. These indicators describe systems under strong demographic pressure and structural vulnerability. The negative side of PC1 is associated with stronger secondary enrollment, stronger primary completion, and higher secondary teacher density. These indicators point toward educational consolidation. So, PC1 can be interpreted as a structural gradient from vulnerable high-pressure system toward more consolidated educational system, and PC2 has a different meaning. It is associated with the primary enrollment, teacher presence, participation, system utilization, and this captures schooling intensity. In other words, it tells us how much educational systems are mobilized in terms of participation and expansion. The structural distribution of countries. This figure shows how countries are distributed within the space defined by the first two principal components. Each component, each point represents one country. The horizontal axis represents the gradient from vulnerability to educational consolidation, and the vertical axis represents PC2, so schooling intensity and system utilization. The first thing we notice is that countries are not randomly distributed. Instead, they form a structured cloud. This means that the variables are organizing country into meaningful educational profiles rather than producing statistical noise. On one side of the graph, we find countries characterized by stronger demographic pressure, high vulnerability, more fragile educational system, and on the opposite side, we find countries with stronger completion, stronger secondary enrollment, and more consolidated educational system. For example, Niger, Chad, South Sudan, the Central African Republic appear in the high vulnerability area. Countries such as Denmark, Belgium, Finland, and Sweden appear in the more consolidated area. The second step is FATSI clustering in the PC1 and PC2 space. And this slide, the clustering is based on countries' position on the first two principal components. The analysis identifies 5 recurring empirical configurations. These are represented by the different colors of the graph. It is important to explain why FATSI clustering was chosen instead of classical clustering. Classical clustering assigns each country completely to one category. FATSI clustering is more flexible. It recognizes that countries may partially share characteristics with different clusters. This is especially appropriate in comparative social analysis because educational systems are rarely rigid or homogeneous. And now this is a heat map. This heat map shows how the 5 clusters differ across the main structural variables. The color represents mean z-scores. Red indicates values above the global average. Blue indicates values below the average. Values close to white are close to the global mean, and this heat map is useful because it allows us to compare many variables simultaneously in a compact visual form. The cluster 4 is clearly the most fragile configuration. It shows high child share, high infant mortality, high pupil-teacher ratio, and very low completion and secondary enrollment. This is the profile of high-pressure fragile systems. Cluster 2 also shows high pressure and high vulnerability, but with a stronger concentration at the primary level. This suggests systems where primary expansion is occurring, but where secondary consolidation remains weak. Cluster 3 shows the opposite patterns. It combines a low demographic pressure, low vulnerability, stronger completion, and stronger secondary enrollment. This is the profile of a consolidated low pressure system. Finally, cluster 1 is more moderate. It is not highly fragile, but it is also not strongly advanced. It can therefore be interpreted as a transitional or moderately consolidated configuration. Cluster 5, finally, cluster 5 remains close to the overall average. For this reason, it is interpreted as an intermediate or mixed configuration. This map showed the global distribution of the 5 clusters. The purpose of the map is not simply geographical. It helps us verify whether the structural configuration corresponds to recognizable global patterns. We can observe that consolidated low pressure systems are concentrated in many highly institutionalized contexts. By contrast, fragile higher pressure systems appear more frequently in part of sub-Saharan Africa. So, primary expansive systems under pressure are visible in several countries where basic schooling has expanded significantly, but where full educational consolidation remains incomplete. The important point is that the clusters are not arbitrary. They correspond to real structural differences in how educational systems are organized globally. Now we can interpret these sociological, these clusters, these statistical clusters into sociological categories. Cluster 4 is, we call it cluster 4 high pressure fragile systems. These countries combine high demographic pressure, high infant mortality, high public teacher ratio, and very low completion and secondary enrollment. Cluster 2 is called, we call it cluster 2, primary expansive systems under pressure. These countries also face strong pressure and vulnerability, but they show stronger concentration at the primary level. This means that primary schooling is expanding while secondary consolidation remains incomplete. Cluster 3 is called consolidated low pressure systems, and they represent mature educational system with a stronger institutional capacity. Cluster 1 is called moderately consolidated transitional system, and cluster 5 intermediate or mixed system. Now, we combine the Catholic educational presence across structural configurations. This slide begins the central interpretative section of the presentation because the bar chart compares Catholic educational presence across the 5 clusters. The 3 bars represent primary presence, secondary presence, and overall educational capacity. And the first important result is immediately visible. Catholic educational presence is not evenly distributed across the clusters. The strongest Catholic presence appear in cluster 2. The primary expansive system under pressure. This is a very important empirical finding because Catholic education does not reach its maximum in the most consolidated system, but it also does not reach its maximum in the most fragile systems. Instead, it became strongest in contexts where educational demand is high, primary expansion is occurring, but institutional consolidation remains incomplete. Cluster 3, the consolidated low pressure system, also shows meaningful Catholic presence, but the profile is more balanced and less strongly primary oriented. Cluster 4 does not display the highest Catholic presence. This is very important because it challenges a simplistic substitution hypothesis. If Catholic education simply replaces the weak state system, we would expect the strongest presence in the most fragile context. This bubble plot is one of the most important figures because the horizontal axis represents the secondary enrollment, which we use here as an indicator of educational consolidation, and moving toward the right means moving toward more consolidated educational system. The vertical axis represents infant mortality, which functions are a proxy for structural vulnerability. The sides of the bubble represent Catholic educational presence. Larger bubble indicates stronger Catholic educational presence. The key result is visually and the largest bubble corresponds to cluster 2. So cluster 2 is not located in the most consolidated area, and it is not located in the most fragile area either. It occupies an intermediate high pressure position, high vulnerability, strong primary expansion, but incomplete consolidation. This is central empirical finding of the education analysis, because Catholic educational presence does not peak where state systems are already fully consolidated, but it also does not peak into the most fragile environment where institutional condition may be too weak for large scale. Instead, Catholic presence became strongest where educational demand is high, systems are expanding, and institutional consolidation is still incomplete. This suggests a logic of complementarity rather than simply substitution. Finally, this is the last slide of graph. This adds another level of interpretation. The previous graph showed where Catholic presence is the strongest. This graph shows how that presence is internally distributed between primary and secondary education. The profile of cluster 2 is especially important. Catholic presence is very strong at the primary level and then decreases at the secondary level. This suggests that the Church's role in this context is closely linked to the 4 stages of educational inclusion. This is for me the central synthesis because I would like to spend a little more time on this slide. This is the last slide, and because it brings together the whole analytical path. Here we connect 4 elements: the statistical cluster, the structural profile of each cluster, the educational meaning of each configuration, and the possible role of Catholic education. These slides show that the statistical analysis is not an end in itself. PCA and the clustering are tools. They help us move from data to interpretation. They allow us to understand not only where Catholic education is present, but what kind of role it may play in different educational systems. And cluster 4 represent high-pressure fragile system, and this country combine high demographic pressure, high infant mortality, and so educational system are here remain structural fragile. And I conclude because I don't have much time, and the church educational contribution becomes most visible when we consider together needs, state capacity, educational expansion, and institutional consolidation.
Now, regarding the health needs, that's the second part of the analysis. I'm trying to be very quick because most of the methodological aspects have been already explained. So the question in this case is about how Catholic presence would be different in according of the country of the country structure. A direct causal analysis is not the church effect on the health development in the country is probably not the main possibilities, not a feasible analysis, because several things. First, the Catholic Statistical Yearbook reports the number of institutions, but it does not provide key operational information like hospital beds or levels of care or service volume. So, nevertheless, the data that we have access are very valuable to understand how the church is trying to respond of the diverse needs of the countries. Another important thing is that a Catholic hospital, an outpatient clinic, or care center is not necessarily the same capacity across the countries, but we don't try to claim that Catholic institutions directly improve health outcomes, but to understand that the contribution is contextual and descriptive. So, regarding this, the rationale of this study, our objective is to build a comparative, data-driven framework to understand health across countries, health justice across countries, and with this data to construct also a PCA, a principal component analysis, and a clusterization to understand how the Catholic health institutions are different in this data. We also used data from, as Isabella mentioned, from the Annuarium and also from the several other sources, World Bank, Global Burden of Disease, and finally, with this cluster analysis, we finished with studying the Catholic health institutions' presence in each system. Obviously, each country has different approaches to fulfill their commitment to protect the health rights in several countries, and the systems are also different. So, when we have this typology, we could understand if these institutions operate as historical actors, complementary providers, or compensatory agents. Well, in this aspect, we have these several kind of information, and if Catholic health and institutions' presence in these profiles are different, we would be showing or proving that the presence of the Catholic health is not randomly assigned or only driven by historical or Catholic presence, but to respond on the necessities. Well, regarding the data analysis that we performed, we are analyzing at country level. We don't have specifically data on dioceses or states, but we have these country levels. We construct this first index with 168 countries, but we exclude countries with 3 or more missing health indicators, key health indicators, and we perform this analysis with 162. The data set brings together these types of information, and it's important because the type of we have 3 different variables. First, health system and population health indicators with health workforce, nurses, physicians, beds, expenditure, the out-of-pocket expenditure, skilled birth attendance. The PTIC that is an important vaccine, and the coverage of this vaccine is a very good indicator of the health system. The access to drinking water, mortality outcomes. The second type of variable is the contextual country levels, population, GDP, Gini index, the region, etc. So, to construct this health capacity index in the countries, we select to perform also the PCA, the principal component analysis. We select indicators from 4 dimensions. The first dimension is health system resources and financing. The second dimension is financial protection, mainly understood as the out-of-pocket expenditure as percentage of the current health expenditure. The access to essential services, as we mentioned before, there's key indicators about that, and the outcomes, the population health outcomes. With this data, we perform first a principal component analysis in which we were able to see that the first component could explain plus than 60% of the total variance, and with the 2 main components, we can explain 71% of the total variance. And these components were directly, or they had direct interpretation. The PC1 was this overall health justice capacity, and the second, the financial protection dimension. So, PC1 was loaded strongly on child survival, maternal survival, health workforce, drinking water, skilled birth attendance, hospital beds, and private care. And the second was mainly to out-of-pocket expenditure. That is a very good variable related on how the system fulfills the necessities or not. This is the distribution of this index in the world country. We can see in the higher values in the countries with a higher level of development. But with this data, we further try to understand with a FOTSI clustering analysis, as Isabella mentioned, for the case of education. We also did this in the case of health. So in this case, the FOTSI means clustering based on these 2 first dimensions of PCA were first standardized, both components, and when we perform this clustering analysis, we can find in this graph the x-axis represents PC1, and the second in the y-axis is PC2. We also tried several solutions from the number of clustering from 2 to 8 were evaluated, and using the criteria FOTSI partition coefficient, partition entropy, the XB index, the silhouette approximation, and the interpretability, the best solution was 4 clusters. As also Isabella mentioned, this kind of analysis is important because we cannot only assign one cluster, each country to one cluster, but it can be assigned with different levels of membership. So the size of the bubble that we see here is how strong is the membership to the cluster assigned. So as we can see, there's countries in the middle of the graph that has there is no a very important membership to the cluster. Well, with this clustering, we found 4 clusters. Cluster 1, resource constrained, higher financial protection. Cluster 2, structurally deprived. Cluster 3, intermediate capacity. And cluster 4, consolidated high capacity countries. As we can see, the cluster 2, structurally deprived, are mainly in some countries of sub-Saharan Africa and other countries in the global south. The global north is mainly represented by consolidated high capacity and intermediate capacity. And we have a very important cluster that is resource constraint. As we can see in the previous analysis, these 2 clusters, it's important, there is not the same. The resource constraint cluster with higher financial protection and the structurally deprived cluster are different, mainly in the principal component 2. This is why the financial component is very important in this case. So, with this data, we try to understand how is the profile of each cluster. As we can see, the number of clusters, the number of countries of each cluster was the minimum of 22 in the cluster of constrained resources, and the other are around 44 or 48. So also the population are higher in countries with higher deprivation. The urban population are higher in countries with high capacity or intermediate capacity, and the Catholic share was higher in the consolidated high capacity cluster. In the other cluster are around 7.3 in the structurally deprived and 10.4. This is important because the cluster with less Catholic share are structurally the cluster with structurally deprived situation. Also, another variables that was not used to perform this clusterization are very clear that are different around clusters. So this is a way to see the validity of this cluster, like the Universal Healthcare Coverage Index. Life expectancy is also very different, from 66 in the cluster 4 to 81 in the cluster of consolidated high capacity. Also, every other variables, as you can see, the number of hospital beds per 1,000 inhabitants, the percentage of coverage of vaccine, drinking water coverage, and maternal mortality, that are very important variables for the health characterization. So, this is probably the most important slide, that we can see how Catholic health institutions are in every cluster. The first thing that is clearly, we can see clearly here in this heat map, is that Catholic institutional presence is not homogeneous across health systems profiles. Some clusters show some greater density of direct medical services, like hospitals or outpatient clinics, while others show a greater density of social care institutions, elderly care, family centers. This is important because this reflects what is doing church in different countries. The cluster has more deprived, has the higher density of this kind of response, the leprosaria, from this important response to this problem. But also constrained and deprived are very high in outpatient clinics, because the necessity of these countries is to have a first contact medical attention to solve some kind of very basic problems. Consolidated system that has a different demographic pressure with a population with higher ages, having long expectation of lives, etc. It's more important to have elderly care, for example. But a very interesting situation is the cluster of constrained resources, because in these countries with low capacity, with a very high necessity of expenditure out of pocket of the families, is where the church has the more quantity of hospitals and outpatient clinics. Also, they have the highest quantity of childcare and nurseries because the demographic pressure in this case is in that way. So we performed some models to try to explain what explains Catholic institutional presence through a model with negative binomial models with population, using the population as offset. And the main outcome was the Catholic health institutions, the several institutions that we have understood, and we used as covariates cluster, Catholic share, GDP per capita. So in this case, we found that the more the variable that predicts the most the presence of Catholic institutions are, of course, the Catholic share. No? It's important. 34% more institutions per 10% of Catholic share. But there is another very important findings. Some of them doesn't have statistical significance, but the tendency is relevant. The most important effect is in outpatient clinics, as we mentioned, is the places where the primary needs are fulfilled, to have a very the first level of attention. So the adjust rate ratio is a 5 with statistically significant when we compare constrained versus consolidated. There is 5 more times outpatient clinics in countries with constrained resources than in consolidated resources. So we have the statistical analysis of all, but this is the main results. So as conclusions, this we could identify 4 health systems profile, and Catholic institutional presence is heterogeneous across profiles. This means that there is different ecclesial forms of healthcare. Adjusted models shows that the Catholic population share is a strongly prediction, but it's important that a distinctive institutional pattern emerged from outpatient clinics in resource-constrained systems with comparatively higher financial protection had a higher expected rate of Catholic outpatient facilities, and that means that the health system context may shape the type of Catholic institutions present more than their overall number. So this is the final results. Thank you for your attention.
So, before we have the open discussion, we'll have the presentation of Martin on the model that can be used to analyze the Church's impact on integral human development. Martin Mendelski is a Catholic social scientist born in Poland who studied work in Germany, Luxembourg, Poland, and Holland, and Rome, of course, yes. And so his approach is multidisciplinary and multidimensional and multilingual. You have the floor, Martin.
let me start with my presentation, and also many thanks to this wonderful opportunity to work at Angelicum and the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. It was a very, I would say, transformative experience for me, because I was not educated as a theologian, but as a social scientist. And by studying the Catholic social teaching, engaging here, also taking seminars at Angelicum and at the Gregoriana, so I learned a lot of new things, and I actually I obtained a new perspective on social science, on how to do social science, on these different concepts that from my background were sociological, economic, from political science, and here I learned a human, theological, anthropological perspective, which somehow changed and transformed me as a researcher, as an academic. And this impacted also on my research and on my presentation, because you will see in a couple of minutes, I was thinking like an economist, sociologist, political scientist in terms of independent and dependent variables. And then I realized that actually, especially after Cardinal Turkson said that in integral human development there are no independent and dependent variables. They are all interdependent. So then I realized that this integration and integralism in French means something different than functional integration. This is what I was, used to study, to learn, this functional systemic integration, also as a sociologist, micro, meso level, macro level. But here, especially in the Catholic social teaching, the social doctrine anchored in moral theology, it taught me something different. Also in terms of methodology, and that's why I would say it transformed my methodological approach and my approach to research design. And I will show it in one slide how this actually reflects not only my own personal transformation, but the transformation of persons, of organizations, and of society. So at the micro, meso, and macro level. And this transformation or conversion starts with conversion of the heart, and it starts with certain concepts on the left-hand side, like spirituality, like fraternity and morality. But then you accumulate or you form certain types of capital which are analogical to these concepts. Spiritual capital, moral capital, fraternal capital, and then civil capital at the macro level. So these capital types Tony was talking about, we can call them non-material capitals or constitutive capitals that constitute your identity, your values, and your approach, maybe even your worldview and life view. So this is for the beginning, and now I want to say also a word that we live in times of profound change, of a shift in paradigms. And I think the old paradigm, the growth paradigm, the GDP-centered paradigm is dying. It has lost trust, so it became distrusting. It is drowning, like Peter in this picture here, Saint Peter. It became dysfunctional, and we need a new paradigm. And new paradigms are appearing, like the economy of Francesco, the economy of communion, or civil economy. So this project is also led by Luigino Bruni and Professor Zamani. And we have an alternative paradigm. And this is basically integral development paradigm, integral human development. And this paradigm is based on a different anthropological foundation. And this is basically, it starts also, and is basically based on, it's Christocentric, let's say, in one word, it's Christocentric. And it is based on trust, on the truth. So I speak now about theological concepts. So it has a telos, a goal, an aim. It is transcendental, oriented towards transcendent God in truth and caritas, and it is transformational or even transfigurative. And how to survive in these times of when the old paradigm is dying and the new paradigm did not yet emerge as a paradigm that can be applied in practice, where maybe this data, as we have seen, and metrics are not yet gathered and applied. So anyway, we need not only the invisible hand Adam Smith was talking about, but we need the guiding hand of Jesus Christ. And this, during this shift of uncertainty towards, basically this is a period of uncertainty, and we don't know where the journey will go when this GDP paradigm dies completely, maybe not. This lies in the future. So I think Christ's helping hand is relevant here, very relevant, and so is this Catholic social teaching and integral human development. And the church role, of course, the church plays a role here, because the church has to navigate through the stormy waters, through these difficult times and uncertain times. And the question is how the church can guide us, how can it become an ark of salvation for economy, for society, for the polity. And so we ask in our project, what is the role of the church? Initially, I conceptualized this as impact. What is the church impact? But somehow I find the title Church Contribution, so not speaking about impact, but about contribution, much more convincing. And the journey started with this research question. How does the church contribute to integral human development? And the hypothesis I make is that the church contribution or impact on integral human development operates at 3 analytical levels: the macro, meso, and micro level, via 2 causal pathways. I call them conversion and transformation, and that combine or transform 2 types of capital. And these 2 types of capital, we can call them constitutive capital, or constitutive forms of capital. Some call them also non-material types of capital, so spiritual, moral, the fraternal, civil, and narrative capital. And the second form of capitals is the enabling capital, which is, we could also say, instrumental, maybe transactional. So this consists of, this group of capitals consists of human, organizational, economic, and last but not least, I forgot it here, the institutional capital. So the rules, constitutions, rules of the game, in governance at the macro level. The goal is then to develop an analytical model or framework of the church contribution. And let me specify now the key mechanism of development, and this is basically conversion and transformation. But before that, I want to show you that I started this research through this mindset that was linear and one-directional causality approach, based on a linear one-directional causality approach. So basically thinking in terms of cause and effect, in terms of independent and dependent variable. And this makes sense for economists, for political scientists, and the social scientists basically try to find out the causal, also not only the effect, but the causal pathways, how this cause, in our case, the church, impacts on development, on integral human development. But some days ago, actually already earlier, I thought more about a different model, an alternative causality approach, which is more transformative, recursive causality approach. Maybe you could call it of a circular causality, like Myrdal called it. But this places, this is about interdependence. And the variables in this causality approach, they are interdependent and process-oriented. So I emphasize transformation, conversion. Under this approach, the church is only one variable among many others. And the emphasis is on the process of conversion. Conversion is not now religious conversion, but conversion of your personal conversion of your heart, organizational conversion at the meso level, change in the community, the organization, and at the macro level, conversion of society. Pope Francis speaks even about ecological conversion. So in this sense, I use this concept of conversion. And about transformation. This is about instrumental change, transformation of structures, transformation of organizational structures, of economic structures, political structures. And, you know, have a look here now. So in the first model, you have integral human development as the outcome, as the dependent variable. But here the picture changes completely. Now integral human development becomes basically a process, an ongoing conversion and transformation. So this is the difference. And it transforms, or the telos is to transform the person, the community, and the society. So the question is here, how to become a good person, how to become a good organization or community, and how to become a good society. These are the guiding and driving questions we have to answer. And Catholic social teaching gives an answer to this, a very good answer. So based on this insight, I developed an analytical framework which is multi-level and multi-level framework. The three levels are the macro level, structural level, the meso level, organizational level, and the micro level, the individual level. And the church, will be also the conclusion, makes a multi-level contribution to on these three levels towards society, community, and person, and the human person. So we start with the church, and we conceptualize the church as narratives, biblical narratives, for instance, then the social doctrine, moral doctrine, and the church capacity, so the resources. And everything which is red here in red color is basically the conversion pathway. And everything that is in black is the transformation pathway. So, and then we ask, how does the church impact or contribute to the transformation of society? And of course, and the answer is that this process of transformation and conversion, which you see at the macro level, so the answer is that the church goes, the contribution of the church or impact of the church goes via meso and micro level, and then up again to the macro level. So first step would be down. It forms persons, human persons, and in particular, it reorients them. Orientation, it is basically spirituality, morality. But at the transformation side, or in the transformation pathway, it also builds capacity and capabilities, skills, education of persons. So this is a double-edged change, double-edged combining conversion and transformation. Then at the micro level, this person that has acquired spirituality, that was born Catholic, went to church, socialized, or inherited the values of Christianity, of spirituality, who prayed as a kid at home. This is basically still, I would say, this is spirituality. It's not yet capital. It's, maybe you can call it some latent capital, or, it's not yet mobilized and actualized. It's not yet productive as a practice or as a action in daily life. So you need some kind of conversion of the heart and metanoia, basically. You need the conversion of this person and the transformation, of course, with regard to skills, in order to produce this constitutive capital or spiritual capital. So spirituality turns into or converts into spiritual capital. This is capital formation. And the other type is enabling capital. This could be called human capital. So this is skills, knowledge, and so on. Then after you have converted this person and produced constitutive and enabling capital, so spiritual and human capital, this has to go to the meso and then to the macro level. Through participation, through contribution, maybe diffusion, you can call it, in order to form civil, economic capital and normative capital. So this is a two-level model here for the beginning, because I expanded this model towards 3 levels and made it a bit more complicated by including fraternity and fraternal capital. So meso level is always about relations, fraternity, fraternal relations. You can call it relational capital, social capital. And that's why also these conversion processes, you could put an adjective before them. So at the macro level, this is called societal conversion. You could call it also moral, cultural, ecological conversion. At the meso level, it's fraternal conversion, pastoral, communal conversion. And at the individual level, this is internal conversion of the heart. So this personal, spiritual, moral conversion. The macro level reflects the common good. The individual micro level reflects human dignity of the human person. Then the process going down from the macro level through the meso and micro level, this is subsidiarity, according autonomy to organizations, and then, of course, and subsistence to organizations and to persons, to individuals, to families. And then when you go up again to the macro level from the micro level, this is about solidarity, solidarization. Also some kind of learning or mimetism. Yeah, if you know a person that has this experience of conversion, becomes maybe active in life, a leader, a good person, these persons are imitated as well and followed. And this is how spiritual capital turns or converts into fraternal capital, and then at the macro level towards moral and civil capital. And this is the literature I engaged here. So many encyclicals, and basically encyclicals addressed the common good, subsidiarity, human dignity, solidarity, and some scholars I discovered, like Luigino Bruni, Zamani, and who are engaging in this building, this new alternative paradigms. I wanted to call it actually a trapezoid, or at the beginning even a boat, Coleman's boat. But you know, it actually resembles a heart. And when I discovered in the compendium of Catholic social teaching the concept of civilization of love, then I thought, let's call it civilization of love pathway, because love is the power that transforms individuals organizations and societies, caritas, caritas in veritate. And this is the transforming power of the Church. And this is not yet in the compendium of the Catholic social teaching, the encyclical of Pope Benedict, Caritas in Veritate. And I think this is really the transformative power of the Church. The second pathway, I call it civilization of capacity pathway. And this pathway, as you see, includes this material development, material forms of capital, or not material forms of capital, but developmental forms that are instrumental, maybe even, forms of capital. And again, you can see here types of transformation: economic, this means structural transformation, infrastructural even, material, physical, then the organizational transformation and individual transformation. So the previous framework, as this framework, just says that in order to arrive at economic and institutional capital, you need to go down to the meso and micro level, experience transformation at the organizational meso level and in the individual level, and then go up again. The question is, of course, if you can skip a certain level. And some persons or some societies don't reach the same depth of transformation or of conversion because they arrive only at the meso level and then try to go up, or maybe even macro level. But who is able today to transform human capacity into human capital? This would require a capability approach like Amartya Sen, Nussbaum, and Sabine Alcayo arguing. You need transformation that is not only producing capacity, but also functioning. Not only resources, but also freedoms, capabilities, and functioning, and I argue here also capital. So this really resembles a boat and something material in nature, something like an ark. And you need, of course, money, and you need, of course, money to buy bread. So feeding, not only reading the word, hearing the word, and orienting towards transcendence, but you need also immanent types of capital and development. How much time do I have? Because I have here, good. Then I have certain explanation of the key concepts here. So conversion, which is based on love. Latin convertere, to turn around, to change one's state. Greek, of course, you heard this metanoia. So this internal spiritual reorientation, renewal, reorientation. This is really important in development because you cannot go on with the same concept and paradigm for decades. And you need to read the signs of times and adapt to the context. You need to learn, also as a church. This is what I forgot to say, that in these two frameworks, the causality or the contribution runs also the other way, from society to the church. This is very important. There are feedbacks, and the church learns from society, learns from these communities, and even from individuals, from individual persons. And this is so important because this resembles that the impact of or the contribution of the church. The church listens to societies, to communities, to people, and has some adaptive power or adaptive. Douglas North called it adaptive efficiency. Basically, learning, innovation. Yeah, would be now a concept from management, but in theological language, it's renewal. The church needs to renew, convert all the time. And that's why there are feedbacks and dynamics from society towards the church. So conversion, reorientation, but also renewal. At the micro-spiritual level, we have conversion of the heart toward God, toward the moral good. And this, when you achieve this conversion, and when you maintain this, and then you really have formed and developed some kind of spiritual capital, like Bourdieu would say, habitus. But I think we can use this concept of spiritual capital as something that is more durable. The same you have at the macro level, transformation, also at these three levels, producing these different types of capitals. And now I come to the conclusion. So you have these constitutive and enabling forms of capital that matter really for integral human development, and the church contributes to both types of capital at multiple levels. I think the theoretical contribution of this research here, of this mainly theoretical, conceptual research, is this multi-level framework, which links church contribution via conversion, so the civilizational or civilization of love pathway, civilizational pathway of love, and transformation to integral human development. And unfortunately, our journey stopped here. This is our last month, June. So in the future, there are certain challenges. And these challenges include the study of interaction of these two pathways of conversion and transformation, as well as assembling better data, better metrics, and explore the relationship between these two sets of capitals, which can be competitive, compensatory, and complementary. I thank you very much for your attention, and hope to see you later.
Thank you very much. Of course, I'm not Enrico Giovannini, but I've been working with him for several years. And last Friday, we had a sort of an internal meeting in my institution where, and we have invited Enrico Giovannini to give us a similar speech. So somehow, you know, I remember what he said. So I'm trying possibly to tell you just very, very, very short speech. Okay, I will start with the title of this seminar. The title of this seminar is The Contribution of the Church to Integral Human Development. And all the paper presented they focus very much on how to measure independent variables. So how to measure the church, how to measure the variable that should explain integral human development. And I think that the contribution of Enrico Giovannini could have been, are you sure that GDP is measuring human integral development? So that starting point is that maybe what, as you asked before, what is the future of this research program? My proposal will be, let's change the dependent variable. The chart is not explaining only GDP growth, but should explain human integral development. So we need a broader set of indicators. So one of the future development could be along this way. But do we have today the right data? And the answer is yes or not. So what has been done recently is that you know that official data are published and produced by National Statistical Authority. In Europe, we have a coordination which is done by Eurostat, but worldwide is the United Nations, who is the owner of the methodology and of the definition. And so basically, very, very short history. We have been using GDP for many years, and we will use GDP for other years because this indicator is very important for many reasons, but is largely incomplete. So the United Nations has appointed a group of high-level experts to design the future in the development of behind GDP. Although behind GDP is not destroying GDP, it's just going behind. We need other number and other indicators. So this expert group has presented its final report possibly 2 weeks ago. So this is a very recent document. And this document is not yet approved by the United Nations Assembly. So this is very, very, very preliminary. By the way, this document embedded a lot of, of thinking about what could be the conceptual framework, which is very connected with his work, and which could be the most relevant data sources to develop behind GDP indicator. Just going through this document, if I can. Okay, it's not working. And try to go down. Okay. Okay, so we have a number of names of the contribution. So we have the list of main experts, and Giovannini is there. And then we have also the list of authors, and the first name by alphabetic order, but I don't think only by alphabetic order, is Sabina Alcaire. So basically this is a group of economists, sociologists, statisticians that have supported the development of this work. So the aim of this work is to guide United Nations and all the countries in establishing new measures which can reflect behind GDP. I would like to draw your attention on the title is Counting What Counts, the urgent need for a new compass. But what is very important is that they have developed, now this is possibly preliminary, but it is very, very interesting. Why GDP is not so relevant or not so completely relevant to measure progress. Progress in the perspective of human integrated development. If we look at North America, you can see that the median GDP is a measure of how rich is like the country. The median is the most representative individual in the country, and of course in the United States, because of open market, free market, and capitalism and technology boost, there is a constant increase in the median GDP per capita. But in parallel, there is also a decrease in expectation of life. So people die before. And how can you put those measures together? Because if you're only looking at the GDP, US is growing and is still developing, but then you have that the expectation of life at birth is decreasing. So there is something wrong in that system maybe is how the world system is managed, maybe is, I don't know. So the basic idea is that those are the inconsistency of GDP. If GDP is supposed to be a good measure of integral human development, all the other measures should be correlated. So if the GDP go up, everything should go up. But this is not the case. And then we have the case of Africa. Africa is experiencing a quite fast growth of GDP per capita. Again, Africa this is a very good news. In the recent year, Africa has been growing quite a lot because of many reasons. But on the same time, we have the other line which measure biodiversity of in the nature, in nature. So some people should say, okay, we have an increase in GDP per capita, so why should we care about biodiversity? But if you reduce biodiversity, they will generate some natural disaster sooner or later. This is a very, very simple explanation why GDP is not fully correlated with all the other measures that are relevant for integral human development. And so the basic idea is that, okay, we as, I would say, official statistician, we used to follow statistical manual. Statistical manual provide us the guideline, but they don't provide us, I would say, the complete conceptual framework. If you think about GDP, what could be a conceptual framework for GDP? This is the conceptual framework of GDP, because you buy that on the market, this is a price, this is a value added, and this is the conceptual framework of GDP. Is this conceptual framework good enough to measure integral human development? Possibly no. And that's the conceptual framework, okay, sorry, but that they have designed. Okay, it's not touch screen. Okay, I'm trying to. On this figure, inclusive and sustainable well-being and progress, they have developed okay. Okay, so they have developed, to this group of experts, they have developed a conceptual framework about what should be measured. Okay, this framework is not completely new, but is nevertheless very interesting, because, and I'm saying specifically to Father Albino, they have included a foundational principle explicitly. So this is the first time that they say we want to measure directly foundational principle. In the other framework, SDGs framework, BEST framework, they have a broader approach with the environment and all the different dimensions. So we already are at the point of having a multidimensional framework because of SDGs, because of like BEST. But this is new. This is very new, because in the foundational principle, you find peace, human rights, and respect for the planet. Those are the three principles that they have put in this framework, and they want to measure them directly. Then another question is, how do you measure peace and human rights? Then we can also speak about, but for the moment they say, we need to have peace, human rights, and respect for the planet as a measurable variable. This is very important. And then they also have tried to establish a bridge between today and tomorrow. This is again new, because they have already developed inclusive, equitable, and sustainable growth principle, but now they are trying to bridge them from today to tomorrow, and they stress a lot about the equity, that the development should be based on justice, individual, community, country, and global. When they speak about global justice, they say spillover between countries, which is, in my understanding, is too narrow, because it somehow restricts what is global cooperation. But also they say we want also to to measure individual, community, and country global equity. And about today, they shift from GDP to well-being. Well-being is a measure of outcome. This means how people, if people is happy, if people has the right services, if people has human dignity, and so the shift is from a measure of output, which is GDP, to a measure of outcome. This is why somehow SDGs framework, 2030 SDGs framework, is declining somehow in favor of well-being framework. So they want to have more measure of outcome, with the risk of focusing too much on subjective well-being, because when you have output measure, you have more solid data. Maybe they are not smart data, but they're solid. When you move to subjective well-being, then you take the risk of volatility. And at this point, I'm sure that Giovannini would have said they want Gallup data, and I said no. Okay, so Giovannini was facing some pressure from other author of the same report, and he told me that they want to replace GDP with a sentiment survey from like Gallup. Okay, so the risk of shifting from output to outcome is that the quality of the measure is a bit more light. But what is very important, and this is very much connected to the work of this group, is that they think about tomorrow in terms of human capital, social capital, institutional capital, and natural capital. So the basic idea is not to measure GDP as a flow, but is to measure GDP as a stock, and also to see somehow to measure the fact that if you live in a country and GDP is growing, but human capital is decreasing because of also demographic effect, training, or poor education, so poor public spending on education is going down, you have a decrease in human capital. Social capital means network, relation, and all this interaction. And if we lose social capital, we lose a lot of, I would say, benefit in terms of well-being. And also they have institutional capital, and also the church, again, is a form of institutional capital. Natural capital, so the nature, how we, so the problem of like decoupling. If GDP is growing and the input from nature are going down, we have a decoupling, so we have a virtual growth. If they are correlated, then we have a problem of like sustainability. Unfortunately, spiritual capital is not there. So this is still incomplete, very incomplete. But somehow spiritual capital can be better connected with human capital, social capital, institutional capital, rather than with GDP. So somehow this framework has established a huge jump towards a measurement of integral human development. I will stop here. Thank you.
Closing remark. One is to thank the postdocs for all the work and the weekly graduate seminars. And so I thank you for that and for all your work, and for the promised papers that you are going to turn in. I'd also like to thank the Vatican Statistical Office for sharing their data for 2016 to 2023. And I'd like to thank Molly as well for her kindness in also willing to share data that had been digitized in another project. But I think it's also important to acknowledge and to thank Sister Helen, because all of this would not have been possible had it not been for her initiative that enabled the establishment of this postdoc program. So for this, let's give a hand of applause for Sister Helen for all the work. It's not easy looking for funds and support. So that is a lot of work. and extending the begging bowl and knocking on doors. So thank you very much for this initiative. I just want to say that we've only scratched the surface. The annuarium goes all the way back to the 1970s. For the strong data, maybe from 1980s onward. We only use what you've actually heard in the presentations today. We're only from 2016 to 2023. And there are many more questions that we simply did not have the time to address because it's only a 9-month program. So we've only scratched the surface. And so there is so much that can be done in just understanding the Church's contribution to integral human development, and in the same way, how the Church itself is changed by the larger culture. That was supposed to be in the second half of what we were supposed to do. It was a very ambitious program, but nonetheless, thank you very much for all your work. And I thank you for taking the time to come and listen to the presentations. Again, as I had mentioned, we intend to push for a published version of these presentations. And if you could just send your interest, your name, your email to Isabella as part of the invitation, so that when it is eventually published, we will alert you to which journal has published it. Again, thank you very much, and I think we have celebratory drinks outside. Thank you.